Hello everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. So thank you very much for joining the workshop on forest biomass for decarbonization workshop organized by REKK. Thank you very much for registering with us and thank you very much for being here. I hope that the workshop will go smoothly. We had some technical issues at the beginning, but now it seems that everything works fine. My name is László Szabó. I'm directing REKK since 5 years. And I'm really proud that we managed to organize this workshop this time because actually what you will hear and what you will listen to is a presentation of quite many years of work from REKK side, because we were building up a very nice model which is trying to capture the forest biomass life cycle actually for Hungary, but we were doing this modeling for other countries in the region as well. And we were focusing on this research effort for that reason that this is a very challenging task. Forest biomass is giving great promises for those who are using this resource. Sorry, probably someone just opened. Okay, yeah. Because of course by using this you have big promises that through the land use and land use change techniques and method you can capture actually quite significant amount of carbon from the life cycle, but we see that there are significant issues which can really influence this process. We can see that you need to have very clear and very strict rules who you should use this biomass from the forestry. And if you don't fulfill these conditions, then this would not be treated as a sustainable resource. So if you really want to use forestry as a long-term resource, you have to fulfill these requirements, and these requirements are quite strict. And this is one question which raised in the latest period, and this is what we see in the reflection in the renewable directives as well. So if you have a look at it, you will see very, very detailed rules who you should use your biomass and forest biomass in order to have this sustainable resource qualification for that. That's the first issue. And the second issue is that lately in the research and lately in the research society, there are issues as well that whether at all forestry should be used for such purposes like decarbonization, because there are very significant issues when we are burning the biomass use. So all these and these related questions will be covered in this workshop, and I hope with the help of the experts here, we can really get into the details. What are these conditions, what are these rules, and what are the really conditions for this sustainable use of forestry biomass. With this introduction, I would like to give the floor to Gabriela Saiko, my colleague at REKK, who will be the chair lady for the workshop and who will introduce the topic as well, and who will introduce the speakers and actually the program as well to you. So Gabriela, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, László. Welcome everyone. Before we start with our keynote speakers, we prepared a quick, very, very rapid poll for our audience and our participants and our guest speakers as well. Feel free to take the poll. It is very quick. We are having 2 questions asking your opinion about biomass, forest biomass energy being renewable or not, and forest biomass energy being climate neutral or not. This is simply a yes or no question. 2 questions, please place your votes. And we are heading for a repeat of this poll at the end of the seminar, at the end of the workshop. And I'm really curious if the speakers, the panelists, and all the debate is changing the participants' view on these 2 core issues. So we are giving just 1 minute, right, Kati? And we will see the results. Okay.
You see the question?
I cannot vote.
We cannot vote.
I cannot vote. Can I stop? Fine. Okay, we are done, and I'm really curious about the results. How can we view it, Kati?
Just 1 second.
Just 1 sec.
And
Okay. The majority of the voters, as you see, voted for considering forest biomass as climate neutral. But it's not an overwhelming majority. It seems that more than 40% voted against it. And how about the renewable status of forest biomass? Okay, renewability is more convincing. Most of our audience members agree that forest biomass is to be considered as a renewable energy source. Thank you very much for taking the time and placing your vote. And we would repeat the same vote at the end of the panel, so like 2 hours from now. And here I would like to welcome Ms. Biljana Kulišić from the European Commission, DG Energy, Unit C2 from the European Commission's Energy Directorate. And she's invited here to deliver us details about the not yet published Renewable Energy Directive, the third update of this very important, this core legal material for the energy sector. I'm not sure if Biljana, you are free to talk about the directive itself, but we are really looking forward to your views on how the legislation is to evolve and the debate that is surrounding the whole matter. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I'm not going to talk about Renewable Energy Directive 3, but because I think that the time here would be spent in a better way if we actually exchange the standpoints and the trade-offs, and we collect new ideas how we can get it better. So I think that the group of these people in the audience, because they are announced like experts in the field, I would be really happy to communicate with the experts and collect the ideas. So we change our mind to not to present that, because it will go in a debate that will not echo that far, but the ideas and the solutions that might emerge, they will go very far. So they would have at least longer pathway. So let's think. And before I start, I would like to thank you for the invitation, because I bring really nice memories from Sopron in Hungary in 2018, when it was the established thematic working group for bioenergy and biowaste in the 11 Central Eastern European countries. So feels almost like being home. And now I'm going to show the screen and start please try to show and try to see how it goes. So if you tell me if you see my screen now.
Yes, we can.
And now you're supposed to see the presentation.
Yes.
Perfect. Yes, it's arrived.
In a presentation mood.
Yes.
Okay, great. So we can go. So although the title has this role, it's a given title by the organizer, the role of forests in renewable energy policy. I would like to bring you, I would like to give you the context. Where do we stand in the energy policy? And to go from this very large global perspective on the climate change, and to really narrow it down from this global point of view to the needle of a pine in the European Union. So bear with me and I will lead you to this story. So first, I would like to highlight and to remind ourselves that we already know, but it's always good to remind that the climate change is a global thing that requires coordinated action. And thus in 2015, the UN has made this great progress to tackling climate change in the global level, with agreeing that on the global level, we will have all nations to make national determined contributions to limit the increase of temperature rise below 1.5 by the end of the century. So these efforts of all countries in the world are explained and communicated in national determined contributions. In the EU, these are energy efficiency and renewable energy targets. And then we also then see where the financing goes. And then what is the link between Paris? So we have the link between UN and Paris Agreement, and then we have IPCC. So this IPCC is the UN body for assessing the science related to climate change, for the uniform methodology, because it's a global thing, and in global level, one needs universal metrics in order to assess the progress towards the target. And in this large methodology, which is full of compromises, because whenever something is global, it's always full of compromises, IPCC considers bioenergy as a carbon neutral and renewable energy source. That's the answer in your beginning of this poll that I couldn't reply. But bioenergy, what is important then, what is assumed, what is considered under bioenergy? It's all energy derived from any form of biomass. And then also IPCC sees biomass in two ways. First, in the biological ecosystem way, which is the total mass of living organisms. And then the second part of biomass is the one that goes actually as a fuel. It's organic matter. It's a section of this ecosystem. And then I believe this is the fine line of the thresholds and the trade-offs that we are going to talk today. And then we also have biofuels that are all solid, liquid, and gaseous biofuels derived from biomass. And this is how IPCC sees bioenergy at the global level. Each country, so the communication from IPCC on the progress is reported in the national inventory reports. Each country has to do that annually. And this national inventory report is very much related to the energy balances. See how I bring you from the global perspective to the energy sector, because 80%, roughly 80% of the greenhouse gas emissions globally are attributed to the fossil fuel combustion. And thus, much efforts are actually done in the energy sector to mitigate this, to avoid this fossil fuel combustion. So there are two major lines. It is not to consume energy in any way. So this is reduced consumption of energy, whether energy efficiency, behavioral changes, take a bike, take a walk instead of a car, passive energy, integrated energy system. And then when we decrease what we can decrease to reduce the energy consumption, then we go for the non-fossil sources, which are renewables, nuclear, and passive energy. So this is what is the framework given in this 80% of greenhouse gas emissions. And what is the trouble in this energy? And what requires extremely open-mindedness and openness to new ideas is that energy, although it is actually in the long run deteriorating the life on the earth as we know it, it also provides access to food, because if we don't have energy, we cannot cook our food, we cannot have access to nutrients and the calories that we need. And we need also to preserve food, whether in a refrigerator or in a packaging or in some larger storages. And there is also this is from the personal perspective, that I'm hungry, and then there is a societal perspective, which is economic development, because the energy is the blood stream of economic development at this point, the way it's set now, and also it is related much to the life quality and comfort. And then also we can debate whether we need the second car, whether we need the illuminated chewing gum, standing poles, the fireworks for New Year's and things, but this is how things are at this moment. And as energy sector is the main greenhouse gas emission source, IPCC methodology greatly relies on data from the national energy balances. And then there comes International Energy Agency, which provides uniform methodology for energy balances. What is important, that energy balances have existed before IPCC guidelines. So they are built, IPCC guidelines are basically built upon energy balances methodology. And what is also important to understand for the point of the discussion and the trade-offs, that in the energy balances, combustion of fossil fuels and thus assigned greenhouse gas emissions are recorded by source and not by the economic activity. Meaning, if there is a diesel used in a tractor to plow the soil, it will not be, this diesel consumption will not be recorded in agriculture because the source of emission is energy. It will be recorded in the energy sector under agriculture. And the greenhouse gas emissions from the agriculture will be recorded as enteric fermentation, manure management, land management, etc. So this is very important to understand how things are working and what is our working environment. So when we go to the, and then based on these energy balances that we have in the uniform methodology globally, each country makes its energy modeling, and International Energy Agency makes energy modeling at the global level to support Paris Agreement and to foresee whether we are on track or not. And here is a worrisome fact. Here is the stated policy scenario, the blue dot. I don't know if you see my pointer, but the blue dot is the stated policy scenario. And these are these national determined contributions or the targets, as we say it in the EU legislation. And here are the temperature rise. So those that have presented in the previous batch of 5-year period, they lead us not to below 1.5, which is here, it is to 2.6. So it's not enough. And thus Fit for 55 to make us here less, but still it's not for the Europe, it's globally. Even with these additional announced pledges scenarios that were made in Glasgow, we are still above 1.5, but at least below 2 degrees. So this is very worrisome to say. And if you look at the other chart about greenhouse gas emissions, so these are in the same colors, you see that in 20 years, we had like 50% of increase of greenhouse gas emissions. This is just COVID, so don't put much hopes on this. And these are actually scenarios, and these are the stated policies. So this is nothing. And actually the effort needed is like this. So in 30 years, we need to change our way of living dramatically. And major changes would be in energy sector, but supported with behavioral changes. And here, what I would like to also to understand the effort needed and where Europe stands is this section is what was before. And here are the stated scenarios, and these are the announced, the more ambitious ones. And all of them, both of them are saying increase in energy consumption because we are decreasing by energy unit per monetary unit of GDP. But because we grow, not all economies in the world are at the level of the development that they would like to be. So there is more energy required, and also the living standard is also increasing. So this is important to understand that energy demand will grow in any case, And in the structure, the most effort is seen in reduction of coal, which is the brown part, very little in oil, which is the red part, large increase in natural gas consumption, and this has been made before February 21. And then we have increase in nuclear, and of course, large jump in renewables. So this is how we stand in the energy modeling at the global level. And we don't talk here about net zero. We talk about announced pledges that are leading us to 2.1 degree. And then in these announced pledges, let me lead you now to bioenergy. So globally, bioenergy in these scenarios is to be doubled in the industry, tripled in electricity generation, and by 4 in transport. It has been seen as an important part of reducing emissions from heat supply and removing CO2 from the atmosphere. And some of the technologies that are related to bioenergy are also related to the carbon removal, land-based carbon removals like pyrolysis and biochar. So this is how we stay at the global level. And the bioenergy at the global level at this moment is 10% of the global energy supply. The total renewables are 13%, and the biomass is 10. So this is the global perspective. And within this 10% of biomass, there is nothing to be proud of, I have to say, because 74%, and this is this donut, 74% is inherited. And this is the traditional use of fuel wood and charcoal in the emerging economies for basic heat, to cook a meal, to heat the room. So this is at the global level. At the European level, things are a little bit more promising. So in the EU 27 energy mix, 70% are renewables, and of those renewables, again 10%. So in European fuel supply, bioenergy make 10% and the other 7%. And from those, so the mix, unlike in the world, the mix is more favorable in the EU 27, where it says that it's 50-50 about in bioenergy and non-combustible renewables. And this is the effort actually made, and this reflected of the renewable energy policy, which is supporting new technologies. But when we look in the bioenergy, which is perceived as bioenergy as a lump, as a whole, we see that woody biomass make 42%, is dominated by woody biomass. And we come now to the forests. So how the energy statistics at the global level, and thus in the EU level, looks at forestry biomass. It looks in the section which is called primary solid biofuels. And it's a very, very broad category that actually reflects anything that one can hold in a hand and can be combusted. And it's of organic matter, so it's not fossil. So it is from the fuel wood, charcoal, bagasse. In emerging economies, it would be dung. So it is very broad. So one would need an educated guess what is in each country presented as primary solid biomass. An educated guess for Europe would be woody biomass, whether as a fuel wood or pellets. And what is also very confusing in all debates, that these primary solid biofuels, as defined in energy statistics, are different from the definition of primary woody biomass that UNECE has. So I will not go to the detail, but it's different than what is seen in the energy statistics. And now we look at the energy statistics on the bioenergy. And the energy statistics is having 10 categories for bioenergy. And educated guess is that these two categories are from woody biomass, and they make 71% of the total bioenergy used. Not used, supplied. Then biogas is mainly, I would say mainly because of course there is feed and food stuff inside, but mainly agricultural residues, manure and byproducts, 11%. And the rest are different types of liquid biofuels for transport that are again mainly dedicated crops, whether from imports or from the own production. And if we look at this primary production here, you will see that it's mostly, except of the biofuels, liquid biofuels, these are mostly domestically supplied, which in these times of exogenous dynamics and interrupted global supply chains means a lot, because what we are taught in schools is that the one that has the control over the energy supply has the control of the social economic development of a country, whether that country is its own country because it has own energy supply sources, or of the importing country. And actually this is very much now seen. So what I want you to bring from this slide is that it's the ratio, roughly it's 70% of woody biomass utilized for energy and approximately 30% of agricultural biomass. But when we look at the potentials, and it's always looking at the potentials, that biomass supply actually is different. It's 30% in forest and 70% in agriculture, roughly. So we see that the utilization of bioenergy and biomass is different than the potentials are actually seeing. So when one does modeling, it is very important to foresee not to have a look on bioenergy at a very aggregated level, but to see what kind of sources one would encourage and one would discourage, because they don't all make the benefits that we are looking for. And this is what we don't see in the energy balances, but the other part of the science sees it. And this is the GRC report, the woody biomass for energy production, because we see it only as a one category, primary solid biofuels. And here what we can see that half of it approximately is from secondary woody biomass. It is not coming from the forest directly. And the other part, about 37%, is coming from the forest. And that large, more than 50%, it's like 60% of something, it's fuel wood. And this is what we are, again, not taking any, how to say, credit for it, because it has been done for many years and centuries before. So let me see how we look it. So this is what is here. It's presented in the same colors. And this is a very complicated chart that will lead us to the needle of a pine. And here, what we have see here first is the 30 years period of different policies. And here, what we see with the brown shades is the primary solid biofuels consumption in the EU 27. The light brown is transformation input or energy companies that are directly under RED, Renewable Energy Directive. The dark brown is final energy consumption, where a user uses wood to make heat or energy for the own purposes, which means that is industry using for its industrial processes, or households using it to heat the space or prepare hot water. So this is the distinction between these two. And here are the big frames. Here are the policy frameworks. So first we have national policies, and this is, you can see, it was mildly getting up stable use of the firewood, and here we see little of energy companies, that these were mostly district heating companies. And then the renewable electricity directive came, that has treated biomass and bioenergy as equal as any other fuel-less technology like solar and wind that they cannot make any impact on the ecosystem unless they are placed in them. So this is a very this is the first part section of the policy when the bioenergy was actually supported, and of course you see this increase in this part. And then renewable energy in 2009, Renewable Energy Directive 1 was implemented, and here you see the difference in the framework because this is 2 years of transposition. So you don't see that immediately in the energy balances. You have to wait. You see this is the transposition because this is lack of legislation. You see the fall, and then you go further. And in that way, in 21, the effects of RED 2 are still not visible in the energy balances. But what is important here to see is that 32% currently of woody biomass is used in energy companies, and 71% is actually used in final energy consumption in industry and households, and dominantly in households. So the households in European Union are the most consumers of primary solid biofuels. And here I'm going to tell you about the increments. So the difference between here and here and here. So these are the increments. So this was 1919 when no national policies. Here is introduction. So this is between the national policies and the effect of the Renewable Electricity Directive. And this is the effect of between the Electricity Directive and Renewable Energy Directive 1. And you see that the Energy Directive, Renewable Electricity Directive, had the largest jump. It's 66% increase, or 36 megatons of oil equivalent increase in primary production. So this is the giant leap that has been made in primary solid biofuels demand, and it has not been recorded since. Later on, you see also increase in the Renewable Energy Directive 1, but it's less, it's 15. So this one is the one that we regret that it wasn't well framed. However, what is important to take home is that in the 30 years period, the energy demand for primary solid biofuels has increased, like tripled, and it is fair to ask ourselves whether we tipped the point. And what is also important, because bioenergy, if it's ever looked at the highest aggregated level, it's always you have to ask your questions whether it's misleading. And in this case, if you see it in the EU 27, it looks like this. But this is very nice evidence how policy framework actually manages or directs the demand for woody biomass. So here you see on this left side, you see EU 15, and here you see EU 12. And the difference between these two charts is that this EU 15 were at the time EU when the Renewable Electricity Directive was in place, and this is this part. And EU 12 joined afterwards. And you see that this increment has happened in EU 15 and not in EU 12. So this is one thing to recognize the difference between the demand in EU 15 and EU 12. We can also observe that the demand for forestry biomass is much larger than in the EU 12. And also what is important and extremely important to carry the message is that biomass has legs, and it will always walk towards the highest purchasing power parity or the best bidder. So here you will observe the exports from the EU 12, and you will not observe here these exports. What you will observe here in the EU 15 and not here is here the minuses, the dropouts. And these are actually energy companies that were contracted under the Renewable Electricity Directive here, and could not fulfill the criteria in Renewable Energy Directive 1. So Renewable Energy Directive was a good legislation and made dropouts of the inefficient energy companies in the previous policy framework. So this is something that is also good for the debate and for the trade-offs. And then to come to the needle, can we do more bioenergy with less biomass? And the evidence of the reflection of the different policy frameworks says yes, but more efforts is needed, because if you see here in the poorly framed renewable electricity directive here, so this is the input of the biomass inside, and here is also so the thick columns are the input of biomass in the energy system, and the thin ones inside embedded here, these are the energy that we actually took from that biomass. And here, which is wonderful, is to see that these are basically the same. So the same energy, useful energy, the heat, the electricity, was taken from solid biomass, but look, with significantly less input, because here energy efficiency, minimum energy efficiency criteria for biomass plants, solid biomass plants were introduced. So here are 22 and here's 54. And this is all about good policy framing. So whether we have missed the point, whether we do all this energy modeling and energy balancing to come back from the needle of the pine to the global level, is that 80% of the greenhouse gas emissions are related to fossil fuel combustion. At the moment, when we introduce all the renewable technologies that are mature and emerging by 2050, there is not enough. And what is not enough is that a part of that about 70 to 80% of these ingredients to make the new technologies are actually coming from only one country, which is China. And biomass is locally supported renewable energy source. What I would like you to invite here in this discussion is to help us to see better, because we don't show you what we see when we do energy modeling and energy balancing and when we make the projection. So we don't see these charts that GRC produces in the other section that is not related to bioenergy. We don't see the trade-offs, and I would invite you to help us see better, because otherwise we are going to miss the point, because the point is to save greenhouse gas emissions. And if we not allow the carbon cycle to make the cycle, and if we take the bioenergy as aggregated, like a lump sum, it's going to give us poor results and poor efforts, and I'm afraid that we are going to miss the point why we are doing all of this. So that's all for me, and I'm open for questions.
Thank you very much, Biljana. I would suggest that we wait with questions to your presentation until the end of second keynote speakers, so that our audience can post more questions. I would like to draw your attention in the audience that in the chat box you can post your questions, and we are going to sample questions or read the most important ones. So if it is okay with you, please stay for Viktor's presentation, and then we are taking questions for the two of you. Is that okay?
I didn't hear anything what you have said, but I will consent and you just carry on with the presentation. Because okay. You are frozen we are frozen from my side, and sometimes I hear and sometimes I don't. Okay. I hope you have heard my presentation.
Yes, we heard your presentation. Thank you very much. I hope the rest of the audience heard me. I encourage you to post your questions into the chat box, and we are taking all the questions to Biljana's and Viktor's presentations in one sit. after Viktor, right? Okay, let me introduce my colleague Viktor Rácz, who works as a senior research associate at REKK. And as an introduction to his presentation, let me tell you 2 sentences. REKK has been actively involved in developing background economic model calculations for the Hungarian government for medium and long-term climate and energy policy developments. Climate mitigation seriously involved, as you can guess. And we took home 2 very important and striking observations. One, that the national economy, the energy sector, will be involved in very, very heavy, deep decarbonization efforts to be accomplished at really, really high costs. Shockingly high marginal abatement costs emerge from our calculations. Second, any of our modeling calculations show a great appetite for biomass energy, simply because of being climate neutral fuel. And the appetite of our models were so high that at one point we had to make an estimate on how much primary soil biomass is actually available within the country. So from these lessons, we developed an exercise for ourselves. We devoted some of our resources to develop a forest carbon sink optimization model to integrate forestries not as only as sole providers of biofuels to the energy sector, but as a natural resource that is capable of naturally sequestering carbon from the atmosphere and storing it for long periods of time. So Viktor's presentation is going to show you our model basics and some of the results of an application to the Hungarian case. So please take the screen, Viktor.
Thank you. Welcome everyone. Thank you for the opportunity for me to present our bioeconomic model, the forest carbon sink optimization model that we named as FOX model. And not to very much repeat what Gabriela just mentioned before. So this model is aims to capture the trade-off between biomass and especially forest as an energy input into the energy sector and as a possibility to sequester carbon. Not going into very much detail about the methodology itself, just to give an overview or a hint about how the model works and in general how this multidisciplinary models, which goes back with the history of more than 50 years, works. Here, our main question is how the optimal harvest decision should be made based on forest economic ecosystem characteristics as well as market characteristics. Both the biological characteristics are considered as well as the market inputs. So the question is how the forest manager should optimize his or her harvest. Here we consider many biological aspects, such as how the current forest stand looks like, how it would evolve in different with different assumptions, and just looking at the forest growth rate. But on the other hand, and this is here represented by this green part of this graph. But on the other hand, we also consider the market perspectives, like how much revenues the forest manager could get from different demand segments, and what are the costs that he or she faces during harvest and reforestation. And of course, in the literature, as we could see from Faustmann's, he said that actually the optimal way to do this harvest is based on the interest rate, which can be given by the forest management, and compared to the social or market interest rate. So if forest manager will harvest in a way that the income or the interest that he or she can derive from forestry is equal to what he or she could get if she would place his or her money into the bank instead. And this is basically our reference scenario. So we are doing a scenario analysis here, and in the alternative case, we also considered, and as others in the past considered, carbon payments. So interest from carbon sequestration. As intuitively, if we think about that, if a forest manager can gather further revenues by keeping the forest for a longer time period in order to sequester more carbon, therefore receiving more carbon payments, then this optimal harvesting period would be increased. So if we go into the Fox model specifically, here our approach was first to replicate or represent the current stand of the Hungarian and later on the Romanian forest stand, by considering different input parameters such as current stone yield ratio and the area distribution of forest. And in order to be able to integrate later on the carbon payment, therefore we also considered other characteristics as wood density and carbon content. So we could actually calculate the amount of carbon sequestered. It's important to highlight that only the carbon sequestration from stem wood is considered in the model. In addition, we were also able to model not only final cut but thinning in the model, and this is the thinning is considered as a function of main standing stock. And in addition to this, in order to be able to represent the total standing stock, we considered the so-called optimized and protected stock. And here our approach was to look at from empirical data, the optimal cutting age or harvest age, and then we looked at how the stand looks like in Hungary and Romania nowadays, and if a stand was more aged than this cutting age, then we assumed it as a protected stock. So therefore we excluded those stands from our optimization methodology. However, we represent them in our results. Furthermore, we considered timber prices by demand segment, and also the cutting and regeneration costs, and as one of the main input parameter, the discount rate as well. As I mentioned earlier, the control variable, so what the model can change or optimize, is the time period for final cut for different tree species in order to maximize the present value of net benefit for the forest manager. And as an output, model output, we could see how this control variable works in different cases. So what is the timing and the volume of harvest differentiated for each species by demand segments, and also for final cut and thinning. And also, therefore, as it has an impact, the final cut and thinning on the main stock, how the main stock and the thinning would change in the future. And these variables were given, or these outputs were estimated also for the reference case. So when no carbon payment was applied for the forest manager, but also when we added different level of carbon payments in the alternative scenario, we could of course gather this information about harvest and changes in stock, but also we could see how the carbon sequestration would change as a function of carbon payment, and therefore we could derive from an economist perspective carbon sequestration supply curve that I would quickly show you right now. So here I would like to introduce to you our results from the Hungarian case. So here you can see that without carbon payment, how the total standing stock would look like in the future. Our model is optimized for several periods, where one period represents 10 years. And here what we can see is that the total standing stock is expected to decrease during the upcoming decades due to the very aged standing stock. And if we add carbon payment, then we could see how this would change. So here I would like to show you an example, and now I changed the slide or the graph for the case when a 40 euro per ton CO2 carbon payment has been applied as an alternative case. And here what we can see that even at this low carbon payment level, the decrease in the total standing stock for Hungary would be reversed or stopped. So we would have a more even or continuous total standing stock. And here, we can see now that the model is aligned also with the intuition and also with the methodology from the literature, that as a forest manager would receive further payments and would face non-timber benefits of forest, then the forest manager would keep the stand for a longer time period as well. And if we can go further here, basically almost the same message is represented in this graph, but from different perspectives. So here, while previously, sorry for coming back, but here in the the graph shows the total standing stock represented in million cubic meter of timber, but now we represent how much carbon is sequestered throughout the different periods. And as also an additional information to this graph, what we can see here is the changes of the total carbon CO2 sequestered in the Hungarian forestry. So we could see previously that the total stand would decrease in the upcoming decades without carbon payments. But if we apply these carbon payments further, then the total standing stock would increase as well. So if we translate it to how much carbon is sequestered in the Hungarian forest, then the changes compared to the baseline scenario without payment is represented here. So, for example, in case of 10 euro carbon payment throughout the next 200 years, only at the end we could see further savings or further additional carbon sequestration compared to the base year scenario. But for example, represented by the red line, here we can see how the carbon sequestration would change compared to the baseline scenario when a 40 euro carbon payment is applied, and as in line with the previous graphs, we could see that the total stock would increase throughout the next decades. Therefore, the total carbon sequestered would also increase during the upcoming decades. If we go further and still looking at the same results, but from another third perspective, from an economics perspective, if we translate the previous slides into the question that at different carbon prices for different periods, how much would be the additional carbon that we could sequester when different carbon prices are applied. So here we could also call it as a carbon sequestration supply curve. So how much sequestration can we supply by forests at different carbon payment level. And here, so if we keep the example of this 40 euro, but we could see the results up until 100 euro per ton CO2 sequestered, we can see that for example, throughout the period from 2020 to 30, an additional 50 million ton carbon could be sequestered. But if we look into more into the future and we keep this carbon payment at 40 euro, then this level could reach up until 80 or 90 million ton until 2040 and 50. So so we can see that again that at different carbon payment level, how much we could additionally sequester throughout different time periods. And coming to my last message is that basically we would like to integrate this approach and not and as it has been said in the previous presentation as well, that we should also look into a more integrated approach, like not only looking at the energy sector but also other sectors as well. So this is basically what we try to do here. On the left hand side you can see an example of our calculations at REKK about how the marginal abatement cost, so the cost of additionally abating or decreasing emission would look like in the energy sector in the future. It's based on our calculations from the Hungarian Times model that's being used for the Hungarian NECP and LTS as background calculation tool. And here you can see that as the abatement level rises, the costs, the marginal costs would increase, meaning that we need additional the additional abatement would cost more and more in the future. So, for example, if we say that here the first 5 million ton of CO2 abatement coming, for example, from energy investment possibilities, it has a very low marginal cost. But if we go further and at the end, for example, other technologies should be considered, for example, in the industry sector, like CCUS or other technologies that are in pilot phase right now, would cost more and more. And as we can see here, these results are representing the abatement cost, and also therefore the supply curve for abatement, and also the demand that we estimated for 2050. So we saw that around 29 million tons of CO2 would be emitted by the energy sector by 2050. And as these two curves are not crossing each other, we can see that even at a very high price, the total abatement from the energy sector couldn't be totally emitted. And here on the right hand side, you can see the marginal abatement cost from our previous calculation, from the previous slide actually, for 2050, and now it's calculated only for 1 year, and so it shows that in average by 2050 we could at different CO2 prices, we could abate up until 6 million, additionally 6 million tons of CO2. So if we integrate these two together, and assuming that now of course there is a limitation that the emission is also only considered from the energy sector, but the savings or the possible savings or carbon sequestration options are considered both from the energy and from the forest sectors. But still, if we integrate these two together, we can see that this curve shifts to the right as the lower that marginal abatement from with a lower level from the forest sector is integrated into the supply curve. And now we can see that these two supply and demand curves intersect each other, and at a much lower level. So we could decrease in total the cost of from energy sector emission. And just quickly wrapping up my presentation, I would like to emphasize that integrating the forest sector into the national climate mitigation policy could provide additional wealth gains for society, and then it would be important to consider actually not only the energy and the forest sector, but other like land use change, and waste sectors as well, and to be able to see them in an integrated way, where can we abate more, and at what price. at a lower level. And so here what we could also see from our results that forests could remove as much as 14 to 20% of the total greenhouse gas emission of Hungary at a lower carbon payment level, as well as what we could also find is that the lower carbon prices would reverse the loss of forest carbon foreseen in the upcoming decades. Of course, every model has its own limitations. For example, in this context, our biggest limitation is that, and we are currently working to release this limitation, is that these carbon sequestrations only include those from stem wood only. And as I probably mentioned, that we developed this model for Hungary and Romania, and we are currently developing one for Bulgaria and Bosnia and Herzegovina. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Viktor. And we are waiting for questions from the audience. Already there is one for Biljana from Mr. Zoltán Kuhn. Let me read your question. Biljana, are you available for an answer? Yes, I can see you. No voice yet.
So you see the other, so because I don't see anything in the panel, in the chat.
This is in the question section, but I'm reading it up so that the rest of the audience can also read it. Peat is not considered as a biofuel, quote, due to the length of time required to reaccumulate, quote ends. What is the accepted timeline for reaccumulation for other forms?
I don't know. It has to be seen in the IPCC guidelines.
Yeah,
no,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sure that this question addresses the very core of the climate neutrality issues here, but I'm not cutting short this line of our discussion. I would like to call the members of the panel to join into the discussion room and switch your cameras and microphones. Thank you very much. We are already having Marco, hello, and Daniel.
Hello. Hello.
And we are waiting for Susanna and Linda. Until they log in, I would then like to start with the gentleman. In the first round, I would like you to introduce yourself and reflect to the topic in general briefly, and in particular to the debate surrounding the update of the Renewable Energy Directive. Would you mind starting, Marco?
Yeah, sure. Yes, I am Emeritus Professor of Environmental and Resource Economics, so done all my life issues relating to climate and water quality and biodiversity conservation and other issues. I'm currently the chair of the Finnish Climate Change Panel, been that out of the last 12 years. So that's my background. I'm currently the research director at University of Helsinki. Concerning these issues, they are complicated. And my view much on the woody biomass, and it's like it will say that the European Union current climate policy considers bioenergy as carbon neutral, but of course we calculate the emissions from forest harvesting to the land use and forestry sector. So after all, it's not treated as carbon neutral. And then the question is that how to use wisely bioenergy, how to use wisely forest residues, how to use wisely the side streams from forest industry, for instance. And these are the things actually what this RED 3 has been tackling on. And in Finland, this is a very important issue because we are not achieving our LULUCF targets, and the whole Europe, by our calculation, will not achieve them. Actually, not even for this 21 to 25 period, we will be short of the forest targets. So meaning that there's an increasing tension between carbon sequestration and the use of biomass, forest biomass for energy. So we are living quite interesting times, I would say.
Yes, thank you very much, Marco. Interesting times indeed. I would like to call Daniel to continue, please.
All right, thank you very much. So my name is Daniel Reinemann. I am a policy officer here at Bioenergy Europe. We are a trade association representing the entire bioenergy value chain, so everything from raw material producers, equipment manufacturers, heat and power producers. And we've, of course, been going through and following the Renewable Energy Directive very closely. I think it is just important to touch upon in the beginning just the fact of the way bioenergy works is it is just going through and tapping into this natural biogenic cycle that we've kind of been talking about today. So you have already a lot of biomass, a lot of organic matter that is already growing. And just as part of the natural cycle, it grows, it dies, it decays. And when it decays, it emits most of the CO2 back into the atmosphere. Of course, there's some share that can be stored in litter and in soils. But we do see in general, once ecosystems become mature, that they kind of become, in general, more carbon neutral in terms of whether or not they're a carbon sink or not. And here it's also, I think, quite important to differentiate between the carbon sinks and the carbon stocks, because of course the carbon sink is the annual change that you see, whereas the carbon stock is the total amount that is accumulated. And so we think that bioenergy plays a very important role in the green transition and in moving us forward. In terms of RED in particular, I think it is a little bit unfortunate that we didn't have the feedback period to see how the impacts of RED 2 were going to completely affect everything before going through and launching into the revision of RED 3. But I do understand the desire to reach these higher targets. And so I think with the new revision that we have, we got some new text that can hopefully work quite well. We think that having sustainability criteria are quite important because, of course, in order for biomass to be sustainable and to be carbon neutral, you do need to ensure that this regrowth is happening. That's an absolutely essential portion of this. But we feel quite confident that the sustainability criteria do quite a good job of guaranteeing this, and that bioenergy is, when done sustainably, carbon neutral and renewable. And thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Am I on? Yes. Linda, would you like to continue, please?
Yes, hi Gabriela, and hi everyone. Thank you for the invitation. I missed the introductions, Gabriela, so I'm not sure what I'm responding to, but happy to introduce myself.
Please introduce yourself, reflect to that topic in general, and maybe in specific the debate surrounding the update of the Renewable Energy Directive.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Linda Zuidema. I'm speaking on my personal behalf in this meeting. I'm working as a senior consultant at Trinomics, mostly on climate and land use related projects. And in a previous life, I've been working a lot on the biomass debate, mostly at the EU level, working for environmental NGOs. So yeah, quick responses to kind of the latest development on the RED, and of course there is not kind of a published directive yet, but from what I've read so far, that compared to, I guess, the previous versions, I think that there are some incremental changes compared to the previous directive. In some cases it was weaker than the proposal by the European Commission. I think from my perspective, and coming back to this debate after a couple of years, in my view, it's largely a missed opportunity to deal with some of the more fundamental questions related to the use of forest biomass that have already been raised by the previous speakers. So from my perspective, this revision was a great opportunity to provide member states with the right signals related to the main sort of trade-offs related to the use of forest biomass, and then mainly the one that is most important, perhaps, in the view of the goal of the Renewables Directive, which is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and so the effects on the LULUCF sector and the capacity of forests to remove CO2 from the atmosphere is an important one to consider. So I think that we are long beyond, the debate about carbon neutrality. I think it's very clear that the IPCC has recognized that we should avoid double counting as such in our greenhouse gas reports and accounts. But that's not being said, that I think it's very clear from the scientific state of play that it depends on a broad set of factors, whether a particular use or a bioenergy system as such reduces greenhouse gas emissions, or whether it actually slows down your greenhouse gas abatement pathway. So I think that's a very important element, and I'm missing personally some signals to member states in that regard. I think your second question about the debate is a very relevant one. I've seen the debate become a little bit more polarized, if I can say so, and I think that's a shame, because it doesn't really help had the process forward in terms of finding constructive ways to ensure that your bioenergy system in member states is actually fitting your long-term climate goals and also your nature restoration and biodiversity goals while you're at it. So those are kind of the more high-level points I wanted to make. I think that there is one issue I think that is often overlooked and very important for all of us thinking about EU level regulations, is how the Renewable Energy Directive kind of fits within a broader climate and energy framework, and how different regulations kind of interact. So the Renewable Energy Directive, as we know, it's the basis for member states to count certain renewables towards their renewable energy targets, and also to support it via state aid. But it has also linkages with the ETS, with the Energy Efficiency Directive, with EU funds, the taxonomy, etc., etc. So it has this kind of spillover effect to a lot of support frameworks that we have in the EU for the use of biomass. On the other hand, and I think it's well recognized by the issue mentioned by the previous speaker on carbon pricing, The LULUCF regulation as such, it recognizes that we need to increase removals, but there is no price attached to it. So in terms of kind of financial incentives, you see a very unbalanced framework, I think, and that's not something that we have solved, I think, at this point. So I'll leave it there. There is a lot to say, but yeah, we are in an introductory point only. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Linda. And last but not least, we are having Ms. Zuzana Sarvasova from Slovakia, from the government, from Forestry Institute. Please introduce yourself, and if you like to reflect on the debate itself, and probably a few words about what you are doing in Slovakia.
Hello to everybody. My name is Zuzana Sarvasova, and I'm working for the National Forest Center, which is some budgetary organization related to the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development. I would like to apologize also our state secretary, who was originally invited as a speaker here, but he has other duties, and on the last minute I joined in this discussion, so I'm feeling like really not really prepared for the discussion. But I could say we as a research institute dealing with all kind of the tasks related to the research in forestry, we are also thinking about the role of the forest in greenhouse gas mitigations and climate mitigations. And I would like to say that there is a really big shift of the demands and in the paradigm and the role of the forest in the EU, because we are here talking about this energy and renewable energy and biomass from forestry, but there are all other policies which are also have their own demands on the forests and the roles. And regarding to the mitigation of emissions, I would like to stress there is not only the option to increase the carbon stock in the forest and the wood products, which is the business as usual now, but there is also this substitution effects of the wood, which we are talking about this fossil fuel energy and materials in construction. And there are a lot of the trades-off between options, and each has its limitations. We know about the risk in the carbon sequestration in the forestry, stands related to the risk of the forest fires and many calamities and all these issues all around here. And I think the mitigation strategy in forestry should be based on the optimization of all of these options. And it is also important to consider the time framework for that and the role of the global markets for wood and wood biomass products in the frame of the circular economy. So all these things are connected, and there are really a lot of the tasks for the research how to solve these problems. So thank you for the beginning. I think it's enough from my side.
Yes, thanks a lot, Zuzana. Yes, thank you very much, Zuzana. We are having a really diverse panel, and I really encourage our audience to put your questions in the question box, because we seek balance in arguments pro and con, because these are very heady times. Member states are going to be very important in how they implement the new REKK directive. And I would, in my second question, I would really like to have your opinion on how you see how prepared are member states at the regulatory level, at the authority level, to do a proper implementation that really starts enforcing efficiency and sustainability criteria that might remain a toothless tiger if at the member states there is not enough competency for implication. On the other hand, what do panelists think about how the bioenergy industries and forestry businesses can address the growing concerns about forest biomass for energy? Yes, Marco, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I'll give a comment on the latter part. In our case, Finland is a good example of a case where we have very strong forest industry and very developed energy industry. And the third thing is that we have a consensus, a national consensus about the use of wood biomass. So what is thought to be sustainable is that we could use forest residues, we could use the harvesting or residues from forest industry, like sawn dust, wood chips coming out from that. And then the industry itself can use the side streams from, let's say, power production or things like that. So, but when we go beyond that, risks will increase. In our case, the big risk is to take care that the let's say industrial roundwood, like pulpwood, is not burned for energy. And by our understanding, currently, something like 3 to 4 million cubic meters is burned for energy, which is an awful thing. And I can directly say that there's nothing sustainable on that. It is just burning wood, reducing LULUCF zinc without any payment. And therefore the interaction and the pricing is important. Currently, energy industry pays more for wood than forest industry. I have several cases where the forest landowner has sold pulpwood to energy industry because they are paying higher price. And this comes to the heart of the problem that we have in the EU policy here. Because the current way that we kind of treat bioenergy as carbon neutral in energy market, it changes the input prices, making wood very cheap relative to the new solutions. New solutions, in my mind, are non-burning technologies like geothermal, heat storage, using sector integration with these new hydrogen type of plants and things like that. And then for the member states to kind of survive or to work right requires an understanding which parts of wood can be kind of burnt in a way that we can say that at least through the substitution impact, it is not increasing the climate greenhouse gases. And second, that we have the balance with the LULUCF zinc. Like I said, we have used 3 models to predict what happens to the European LULUCF zinc, and our results are really, let's say, scary. EU will not achieve its target for 2025 for its forests, and EU will be very, very much behind of the target by 2030 if this goes on. So currently, actually, I'm not so sure how much the legislation is the important thing, but the understanding of what we are doing and taking the bridges and having the firewall on certain issues when it comes to the use of wood is important. And besides, why should we promote burning in the first place? Why don't we promote for EU, in the whole EU, these new non-burning technologies, which over time we need in any case? And having cheap bioenergy decreases the incentives to invest in the new technologies. That is actually the reason that we in Finland, our climate change panel, has proposed a tax on the use of, let's say, kind of roundwood burned for energy in a bigger energy plants that are higher than 20 megawatt. So it's not only kind of using bioenergy, but also the incentives to get something better. We should balance or have trade-off between these two things.
Very much.
Yeah, so I think I would respond to that in a few ways. I think first off, one of the things I would kind of focus on is that we actually do see quite a differentiation in the market already today. So the material that can be, you know, high quality saw logs, you're going to get, you know, at least 3 or 4 times as much sending that to a sawmill to make long lasting wood products as you would for forest residues, which are being used for bioenergy. So we see a lot of the cascading principle already operating on the market today. And looking at the LULUCF sector, of course, it is very important to be considering how the sink is developing. But when we look at LULUCF, we do see that one of the biggest drivers for the carbon sinks is the forests. And one of the biggest drivers of whether or not how much a carbon sink a forest is going to be is the age of the forest. Because younger forests go through and absorb more carbon than older forests do. Older forests are going to be a much bigger carbon stock, but in terms of a carbon sink, that's going to start decreasing as the forest reaches maturity. And looking at the life cycle of forests and these harvesting periods, I mean, most forests that are being used for productive measures are going to be on an 80, 120 year cycle. And it just so happens that a lot of the forests that were planted in Europe were planted quite a while ago. And now we're kind of starting to reach that maturation stage of a lot of the forests. And so we are seeing just a very natural slowdown in the carbon sink that we're experiencing every year. And if there isn't the renewal of the forest taking place, then we're not going to be able to have those kinds of much higher carbon sinks that we were seeing previously. And just even kind of going beyond that, I would say another thing just important to keep in mind with all of this is just how forests are so multifunctional, and we do expect a lot of different things from them. And if you are going through and optimizing, for example, biodiversity concerns in a forest, that might actually go through and reduce some of the carbon sequestration ability that that forest has. If you are going through and increasing certain productivity aspects to increase more material, to increase the substitution effect that you see by having more bio-based products as opposed to having fossil products, that's also going to have an impact. So in, you know, looking at how it can be used for recreation. And so you can't have one forest producing a maximum amount of material, maximum amount of carbon sequestration and maximal biodiversity benefits, because these goals don't always perfectly align with each other. And so we need to have a very, you know, clear view of what different forests are trying to achieve. And focusing on that, I think it's best if we have a lot of this decision making being left to member states and being left to local levels, because that's where you're going to have the greatest awareness of what's going on in the forest. And with forests, we also see a challenge because, especially when it's compared with agriculture, where we have such granular and detailed information, there's oftentimes a bit of a frustration that, you know, we don't have the same kind of reporting on forestry that exists in other areas. But when you consider how remote these areas are, if you consider what kind of long time periods we're talking about, it is just more difficult to have the same kind of data and monitoring happening that we do see happening in other areas. So I think this is something that is a bit complex, but we do see that generally, if these, you know, decisions are able to be made at the local level, where there is a greater understanding of how all of these different factors are you know, interacting with each other, I think we can really see a much more efficient outcome, because, You know, the forest resources that we have are so different. A forest in Finland is going to be completely different from a forest that you're going to find in Italy, for example. And those are going to need different, you know, practices, different management techniques, and what might work in one could actually be quite harmful in the other. And so trying to go through and have this all centrally done at a European level, I think does pose quite a lot of risks to ignoring all of those nuances and differences.
Biljana?
Well, I would like to drive discussion in a different way and to remind what is in the energy balances and what is related in the biomass flows. So what we have seen in the energy balances is that the 23% of the users of solid biomass are the energy companies, those that are incentivized in some way to use biomass and to produce bioenergy and sell it at the market, whether it's heat or whether it's electricity. So that is very important. 23% of the demand is those that are directly related to Renewable Energy Directive, and those that are required certain efficiency thresholds. So they cannot get their license unless they have a certain efficiency thresholds. So the old ones, the electricity only facilities, they are phased out because they were inefficient. So this is not something that we encourage anymore. So this is important from that side of the discussion. The other part of the discussion is that the 70% roughly is used in final energy consumption, which is the choice of the consumer to buy that wood or use it for energy. And in that 70%, roughly, again, 20% is industry. And if you look at the industry, zoom in, 80 to 90%, depending on the country, it's wood-related industry. So they are the consumers of solid biofuels. So those are the pulp and paper, they are the particle boards and furniture industry. So they have a choice to make more particle boards, for instance, or material use of that secondary biomass, because that biomass is coming from because once you make a chair, about 50% is residue. It's a secondary biomass. If you make pulp and paper, there is black liquor. This is also recorded in the energy balances under primary solid biofuels. So this is very important to understand that they have the control whether they are in which way they are going to use it. And this is not on the market. That biomass has the price of the timber purchased on the timber market for material use. So this is up to them how they are going to use it. So if they would have solutions, and this is what I'm trying to say, there are at this moment no solutions to get the heat for industry processes in the renewable way. So instead of making material use and making, for instance, chairs out of coal-based energy, they use bioenergy that makes their chairs neutral. This is one thing. And then the large chunk, 50%, is firewood. Traditional use, Europe, 20%, maybe bioenergy, Europe has better data, but about 12% actually, I think it's for pellets. And it's used in households. Since Brexit and when drugs left from Europe, all pellets are in households. I mean, not all, but most they are visible in household use. So, and they are fine combustion. The combustion of pellets is so well done that you don't need a chimney for that. You don't have particle matters as you have it in the firewood. You need a vent like with natural gas heating. So these are things that are very different and they are not regulated with Renewable Energy Directive. This is very important. And then also just want to highlight in terms that we don't see in the energy balances, but we see it from the biomass flows that are coming in, is that 50% of bioenergy, solid biomass that comes to the energy use is from secondary biomass. And then the other half, roughly again, if you remember the pie that I proposed with the show, and then the other half that comes from forests is 70 to 75% of forest primary, the firewood. That is again not related to renewable energy directive. So it is very important. I mean, not to give the impression that I don't share the concerns and that these are not recognized. I ask you and I ask ourselves, and we ask ourselves every day what we can do not to surpass the tipping point of the forest carbon sinks, while keeping the 80% of greenhouse emissions away from the energy sector. So this is definitely so we share this concern. But I just want to bring and invite ideas how we can tackle this. But we are talking about things that are done, like the thresholds. So if we would increase the thresholds for energy efficiency in energy companies, that would require higher quality of biomass inside, because quality of combustion is related to the quality of biomass inside. And that would directly create collision with particle ball and material use of biomass. So these are the trade-offs that we are dealing and we are recognizing it. And I just roughly just wanted to see, because while Marco was saying, I went to the internet and I visited the website of the international, the furniture company that has subsidiary in each of our country. And I looked at the most sold wooden chair. And it is sold at 52.96 euros and it weighs 8.53 kilos. So in the prices of pellets, that would be 4.18 euros. Technology-wise and investment-wise, it's more or less the same automatic process. So one cannot say that this chair will be ever jeopardized by pellet demand. It is jeopardized by the forest man jeopardized. It is about the trading stuff that is happening, not because of the subsidies that are happening on the energy market, because the gap is too wide. So, and the other things that were too, because it just, so I didn't react immediately because I wanted to make sure that these prices are going well. But then Marco was explaining that we have, so that the energy companies are willing to pay more than the material use companies for biomass. And then we talk about cheap bioenergy that is widely spread and people would like to have that. I would say that this year is exceptional, and there is because everybody had to find its way, especially on the northern part, regarding the heat and the disrupted supply of natural gas. And what is the source? The source was locally available, which is biomass. Nobody is burning, it's combustion. Burning is Amazon set on fire for livestock. Combustion of biomass for energy purposes is in control process, and when it's control process, it's something that brings good. So this is what I wanted to say from the discussion point of view.
Thank you, Biljana.
Both, but Susanna hasn't said anything, so and neither Linda, so I'm letting them to talk.
Okay, so thank you for the view. I can agree a lot of with your doubts, but still, when I'm talking about the forestry managers on producers side, you know, this price on the market are really tricky. This year is maybe, or the last 2 years with the war and everything is different, but still we as a producers of the raw materials of the biomass from the forest, we let's say plan the forest for the different purposes, and the forest owners and managers, they own expectations, why they are growing the forest. And the price of the timber and the wood and fuel wood is one of the important factor, but it's not the only one. And to put it in the frame of the EU policies, let's see how different targets are there and which are expected to be covered by the forest and forest managers. And that's the important, let's find the balance between these different targets. And we are looking at the EU industrial strategy, and they are thinking about the raw materials and the carbon friendly and reducing the footprint of the carbon. On the other hand, we have the need of the renewable energy from the wood biomass. We want to secure the energy supply and to mitigate the energy poverty. This is what we are talking, that everybody just use the local sources and to save the basic demands of the life. And on the other hand, we also need the sustainable forest biomass for the products, for the materials, for the chairs, for the others. And on the other hand, that we have other expectations from the environment policies regarding to the protection and conservation of the biodiversity, and there is not available sources for the biomass and industry, and there is a lot of the expectation, I think, from the EU level, which are somehow transforming to the national laws. And there is a lot of the conflicts between that. That's what I want to mention here, that we really need to find not only the wood or the forest, which will be the producer of the renewable, sustainable biomass for different using, but we also need to find the forest which will be protected for the biodiversity targets, and we need the forest which will be sink of the CO2, so they should be managed, you know, not take like no intervention forest for the no use. And so there is a lot of the conflicts and trades off between the different, and up to that there is the different, let's say, expectation on or attitudes of the forest owners. And that's the problem which I see behind this whole discussion about. That's something which should be solved also on the EU level and at the national level as well. And on the end, there is the final decision of the forest owner to whom he will send or don't sell the timber or wood. Thank you.
Linda, would you like to react for this this line, this thread of the conversation?
Yes, sure. I lost sound, so I reconnected again. So I hope you can hear me well. So yeah, I mean, I guess what Susanna just said about the multifunctionality of forests is a hugely important issue. I think that the challenges for forests in the EU are very complex and very diverse, but they exist in all biogeographical regions. There is a need for action to protect and restore forests, and to indeed protect and enhance all these different functions that forests provide. So including provisional services as biomass, but also carbon sequestration and biodiversity and so on. Not in the least because of climate adaptation needs, because we, especially in Central Europe, we've seen what climate is already doing in forests, and it's hugely important for foresters and for nature to ensure that the right action is taken there. But I think what I always try to bring in is that we also shouldn't kind of kid ourselves that we are going to regulate forest management through our bioenergy policies. So I think that I have been quite critical already in 2016 when we were discussing the RED II, is that discussing forest management rules in the renewables directive is not the most relevant place to do that. In fact, and that might sound crazy from a person that has high environmental standards, but in fact I have always taken the view that it's more important than to talk about forest management rules. It's more important to talk about the scale at which you're using your bioenergy and forest biomass in particular, where you're using it in your energy system, and perhaps what kind of feedstocks are you using for energy production, rather than talking about sustainable forest management, because in the end, even if you manage your forest sustainably, you can still argue that cutting down trees for energy is not going to help you address your climate targets. So maybe asking about good examples, and I think that's a very relevant question in this debate. I tend to like kind of practices and whether it's policies or practices on the ground that try to address this. So that look at first of all at kind of where do we have better alternatives in the energy system that still might need different investment types than bioenergy, but that we want to see develop over time in light of our climate and energy goals, because there is this threat that especially if you look at state aid frameworks, that if the real kind of carbon impact of bioenergy is not accounted for, that your bioenergy option looks more cost effective than it really is, and it can lead to a sort of market distortion in your renewable sector, in the sense that, for example, in renewable heat, it kind of is a barrier in itself for more innovative technologies to develop. And I think that's and the same applies in a certain way in the power sector. And I think the effect of kind of carbon pricing and the ETS was already mentioned as one factor, but I think that there are several kind of financial incentives where that is playing a role. So that carbon, that market distortion and the need to have really a longer term strategy and allow for limited sustainable biomass resources to be used in those sectors where we really don't have an alternative is really a key challenge. And I think a second point is ensure that your bioenergy system is not leading to a situation where you're missing out on developments in your broader bioeconomy. So as substitution can take place in many forms and in many sectors, and it's now kind of our arrows are directed at the energy sector, but of course the bioeconomy has a lot more to give, and we need to ensure that it's not counterproductive in that regard. And I think that there are some member states that have already shown that they are quite critical, or that they are planning a different kind of approach there. So those would be my quick responses. In view of time, I'll stop here.
Thank you, Linda. We are having very short time left. I saw Biljana wanted to add a remark.
Well, we saw bioenergy as a part of bioeconomy. I just wanted to say, and also there is a wonderful examples where bioeconomy can offer to have both in the same time biochemicals, biomaterials, and bioenergy together. For instance, you will have biocomponents, highly valuable biocomponents, for instance, vanillin or beta-glucan that you can extract from biomass. And because they have such a small portion content in the whole overall quantity of biomass, after this biomass is depleted, then the other use is difficult, but you can always press them in a pellet. So before having pellets, one can do something before. So this is what we are actually looking to have more bioenergy and biomaterials from the same or less biomass engaged. And this is, I think, the key to sustainability, to carbon sinks, like to mitigate, like to not to mitigate climate change, because this is not the silver bullet, but at least to arrange and to maximize from the forests what they can do. And they can do the carbon sink, they can have the carbon stock, they can provide the multifunctional use benefits to the society, and also bring materials and energy in a smarter way, as Marko was saying. In a smarter, this is what we need. We need a smarter way of using our resources, and not having these linear business models and looking only on a kilowatt hour that is getting from that energy, from that wood, but to have a broader picture what kind of climate benefits this kilowatt hour from forestry biomass brings to the society. So I think that this is the way how the forest should be concerned and biomass in the Renewable Energy Directive, and all others that are coordinating the households and the industry. So this is because it's not only Renewable Energy Directive. So this is how I would sum it up from this inputs from the colleagues.
Was there a hand raised, Marko, from your side?
Yeah. I just a couple of comments. One thing that we have to remember, if we are going to use bioenergy from wood, and if it's going to be sustainable, it can only be based on commercial harvesting or related, meaning that we have other uses for the trees first, and then we use these harvest residues or secondary parts that are left from the primary use of timber, meaning that actually it is the amount of harvesting then that defines the supply of sustainable bioenergy sources when it comes to wood. So there are limits to the production from bioenergy. And if we want to increase bioenergy, we should increase harvesting. And that is directly out from the forest sink. And therefore, EU must not forget to create incentives to non-burning technologies. And if this REKK 3 would have, for instance, a part that if pulpwood is used for energy, there should be a tax on that, then this legislation would have been much wiser and tighter, to my mind. The second thing is that it's not according to science to say that if forests grow old, the sink vanishes or they don't sequester carbon. They will sequester. If we end harvesting entirely, our sink will increase at least the next 150 years. There are lots of studies of conserved forests, and their sink is increasing. It's partly because of the needles and leaves going down, so what happens in the soil carbon. But actually, the trees do not decay at that rate that even you can say that the forest go down, or forest, the sink that is related to stands decreases. So, but this limited supply of climate-wise sustainable fractions of wood is the thing. And there's a risk that the higher the price of energy, the more we step beyond that. And then we are using the sink for energy. And that is not sustainable. And therefore the EU should change the whole thing or not the whole thing, but increase the parts that give incentives for non-burning technologies for heating. I think that for electricity, it's the silliest thing to use combustion to produce electricity. It's heating and cooling which is here at stake, and that should be done over time with other means than this quite narrow set of sustainable bioenergy. So, Biljana, this is my message for the next revision, the energy policy.
Thank you, Markku. And because it's our time is up, I would like to thank all the participants of the panel. And before you leave, our audiences are required to take the poll again, because we are really curious if any minds were changed by our balanced debate, pro and con, being biomass climate neutral and being renewable. You can cast your vote right away. And just stay for an additional minute and you will see the results popping up soon. We cannot vote. Right. And the second question about renewable status. Okay, now it's closed. Let's see what we have.
Okay, let's see. This is like an Oxford debate.
There is a change. There is a change. Climate neutrality became 50-50 as opposed to 80-20 before the seminar. Oh, it was the 60-40, yes. It was 60-40 before for our workshop. And how about the renewable status of biomass energy? Okay, that shifted a bit again, losing 20 percentage points in favor of calling biomass energy renewable as opposed to not. Thank you very much. I hope it was interesting for our audience. I really enjoyed the panelists' contribution. Thank you again for being here and devoting your time. I would like to let you know that the recording of this webinar is made available on our website as of next week, along with the presentations. So feel free to visit REKK's website and make use of these resources. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.